In all this success, Leo always stayed a simple guy.
He started as a hairdresser. He didn't have to be. He could go anywhere and do anything. People loved him and embraced him and wanted him to join them.
He wasn't just a hairdresser. I personally always felt that Leo was particularly gifted from our Lord, that his brain had a 200 IQ and his hand had a 500 IQ.
They were hands with long fingers. This man could have been a pianist, he could have been a surgeon, or he could have been a hairdresser.
I've never seen artistic raw material like that.
He could lay it out in such a way that it is available for hundreds of thousands of students from all over the world. What he is a master teacher. It wasn't taught the way Leo taught it. He changed an industry.
Leo changed the world. If you look at his graduates, you'll see they've been in Hollywood, they've been on Broadway, they've started schools, they've started companies, they've been educators, they've been so successful in so many different ways.
It's all about education, empowered through education.
People who have worked with celebrities and become celebrities themselves. They've created products, created styles. His graduates speak for him. Go to a beauty show in any given time in any part of the world, and if you look, you will recognize the impact Leo has had on people. Millions and millions of people. They come from all backgrounds, all walks of life, all cultures, all geographies. And what they all share is a system and solid training that 50 years ago changed this industry.
Amongst the population of professional hairdressers, he is not only the omega, the zenith of our industry. It's Leo's vision that became pivot point. It's the core of the industry. Everyone knows who Leo Passage is because he affected hairdressers across the world.
I think the longer-lasting, larger legacy is the impact he's had on individuals, on their families, and on their communities. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, just how important the salons are to our communities. Any town you go to is going to have lots and lots of salons. And if you aggregate that and think about it in the larger sense, there are a million stylists out there, and each one of those stylists is seeing lots and lots of people.
This is a technique that you can actually do in the salon.
His approach to education and life touches millions and millions of people. People who didn't have an opportunity to go to college, perhaps. People who really didn't have a lot of opportunities and choices. He's given people an opportunity to earn an honest livelihood, to have a sense of pride, and to really touch the people around him and be part of the economy.
It was never about the money for my father. It was far more important to him that people took this wonderful education that he was able to develop and make something of their lives. You know, that was really his primary goal in life.
It's always been about pure passion for him and about sharing everything that he can possibly share. And so again, for me, it comes back to who is this man really?
I don't think he could fully realize what it all meant. He always had stories to tell. I don't think he really realized how different events had such an impact on his life. It was important beyond the hairdressing world. It was about creativity and the creative ability to adapt if necessary, about stretching the boundaries of what was possible. It was about doing what he loved to do, having an opportunity to express his passion, and just giving other people the opportunity to do the same.
In life, we start here and we end there. What we do in between makes the difference. I was born in the Netherlands on March 21, 1936. After 3 weeks, my father moved to Belgium, 15 kilometers away.
That was a small town named Hamond. That was the place where Leo and me grew up. In the area where we born and we raised up was more farmland. Hamond was an important crossroad. In that small town, the railroad was a really important connection from Germany to Antwerp through Belgium to the Netherlands, traveling through Hamond. The influence from my mother to Leo was really important. She never say no. She never complained. She always ready to help you and everybody. And when my father have problems with Leo or me, my mother stay always in the middle of us.
He was a strong disciplinarian. My father would tell about how hard he was toward him and his brother. In a sense, I can understand because he did have this presence. And he expected a lot from his boys, and he let them know it.
Our father was a hairdresser. He was a very proud person. He had only 2 things in his life. It was his family and his barbershop. He loved his barbershop. That was the place to be.
My grandfather worked 7 days a week. In fact, he never took a vacation.
He was always working, from early morning into the evening, and even once the barbershop was closed, late into the night. That's who he was. His work was who he was. The barbershop was who he was.
It was a focal point. People would go into the barber shop every week talking about what was going on. He did the mayor's hair. He did most of the people who lived in that town. It was not just a place to go get your hair cut, but also to discuss the things that were going on.
He was very well respected in the community. My father used to tell me that people would actually go to him and get medical advice. He knew everything about everyone, and those people had a deep trust in him. He strongly believed in a responsibility to the community, and eventually he felt it was important enough to basically put his life and his family's life on the line.
In 1940, we were not in the best circumstances. The Germans invaded from 2 sides.
Across from us was a bakery, and I remember being at that bakery looking at the Germans coming through with their horses, their tanks, their cannons, and I just remember very vivid. It just kept going, on going. My parents were scared. A lot of my father's and my mother's family were in concentration camps because of being picked up.
German take the people that have the Dutch nationality to work in Germany. Slave labor camps, weapons factories. So everybody that had the Dutch nationality was so scared and ran away to the south to reach France.
Once the Gestapo was coming, looking for my father. They were going through the house from room to room. My mother was just as pale as it could be. My father was going to hide and succeeded to escape. And my mother was alone with me.
She was afraid for my father. My mother thought she was never going to see him come back.
It was a very dangerous time. While he was in hiding, my grandfather felt it was important to take a stand and join the underground.
In Belgium, the underground, what we call the White Brigade. If my father would have been caught by the Germans, they shoot him. There was really no questions asked. After 6 weeks, the German army had already moved in. They needed workers. They needed hairdressers. My father came back. He was very brave and very scared.
Because my grandfather was the town barber, some of his customers were the German soldiers. Because he spoke and understood German, it made it easy for him to find out information that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been available to most others.
I could feel that anxiety that constantly was around us, knowing that my father was in the underground at the same time. During the daytime, he was cutting Germans' hair, and he could hear from them information that he could later on tell to the other ones. But I know his heart was bouncing every time there were meetings in the house and what they were going to do next. You could feel the tension.
They were helping to get Jews across the border and into safety. I think what my father saw in his father is that my grandfather saw that something was wrong. Something wasn't right during this time of war. The Jewish community was being persecuted in the worst possible way, and despite the fact that my family happens to be Catholic, my grandfather saw this happening and realized that it was wrong, and instead of turning his eyes to it and not doing anything about it, he felt it was important enough to take a stand and even put his family and himself at risk in order to help. A strong characteristic of my father is that he's very calm and doesn't panic easily, and I think he learned this. So when he was a small boy, his father sort of recruited him to help him with his efforts in the underground. And my father used to get on his bike, and because he knew all the back roads and areas where he could sort of hide, he would lead the Germans to chase him and then divert their attention so that the other people who were working in the underground could help get the Jews over to safety. That's what he grew up in. He didn't know any better at that point. I think it wasn't until he got older that he really realized what danger he was in.
I think you're born with a certain character, and Leo's character is extremely positive, even as a 4- and 5-year-old. He wanted to see the world. He loved nature. I think it really helped him during the war. He would go into the woods. He would find bird eggs, a bird nest, and bring little birds that had fallen out, bring them home. He would pick wildflowers for his mother. That's the thing Leo was when he was a young boy.
I think spending time out in the woods became an extremely important part of his creativity. He saw much more than what other people saw.
You can look at nature and see what nature expresses. It can be how a branch of a tree, how it grows, or a leaf express themselves. I saw the world creating itself.
this wonderful education that he was having was a very creative one, but it was cut very short during the war.
This is war. Forget about texture, forget about color. We had black and white, two different opposite contrasts. When you really actually saw people that got killed and you had those rockets flying over, you hear these whistles and bomb and then crashing through walls and windows. See the burning places that they were in where everything was gone. I remember being at home with my father and mother, and at once we hear this whistle of this bomb, just like it was coming right onto our house. My father threw my mother and me on the floor, and he put himself right on top of me. When the bomb exploded, the winds blew out of the house. At that time, I was already 9 years old, so I realized very much that war is a dangerous game.
In the end of the war, Leo learned there to have trust in people, to share information with people. When you live in a small community, each other have to help each other. You need each other.
It was a dark chapter in the history of Germany. Total destruction. You lose your home, you lose everything. We had nothing left. People were under the German occupation. They had the same condition. There was nobody to help them either. So they were starving like we were.
Right after the war, there was basically no economy left, so people had to rebuild themselves. The economy was to shatters, and everybody that wanted something better and wanted to survive took responsibility for his own future. Leo must have had a tremendous inner drive that was never damaged really by the war and all the sad circumstances. His inner drive to create something new must have been tremendous.
Leo became quite sickly, and so his parents decided to send him to Brussels to live with his aunt and uncle. They seemed to have better means, and they took care of his health there. And then he went to school there as well. That's where he learned to speak French.
But now I'm in a big city. I'm no more in a small town. And in a big city, I just experienced a whole different view of life with the streetcars and busy people, seeing all these beautiful places, and it made an impact to me then, at that age, to say, wow, you know, there's another world outside my hometown.
I think he then knew that he couldn't live in a small town, that he needed to be in a bigger city. And I think Brussels is what did that. He just knew he just had to travel.
The experience of the school and the war, I think that shapes why he became the type of personality that he became. If there is no institution to take care of you and life is full of uncertainties, then the only certainty you have is who you are and your own skills and your own attitude, above all, to making something out of your next day.
Back in the Netherlands, I was 16, 17 years of age. My father wanted me to go on to college. He wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, anything, you know how parents are.
He was an excellent student. He don't want to go anymore to school. So my father said, okay, what you gonna do?
My dreams was the Himalayas, Amazon, all the exciting places around the world.
No way, said my father. You come in my barbershop.
And so it started that I had to apprentice under my father, and that was like being in a war zone. I mean, this is where my father and I did not get along. I just hated to assist. I'm not into hairdressing at all, because the hours that my father put in, my father had given me one of these white color long ropes, like, you know, stiff like a board. Totally out of my element in that salon, and I smelled the lotions, the ammonia and all that. I about fainted at first. This is gonna be murder if I have to stay into that.
My father was restless. He was always taking off into the woods. He'd hop on his bike and travel to towns and even countries. He was just always on the move. I think that restlessness affected his work in his father's shop.
He handed him a shaving brush and he said, start putting soap on this person's face. Leo would just take off. He would have the person sit with the soap on his face and then just take off and not come back.
Leo worked in the barber shop by my father 6-7 weeks. And my father said, no way, because he was more on the street than in the barber shop. He don't like it, not at all.
He saw his father just dredging away, cutting, cutting, cutting. There was no interest, no feeling of, wow, this is something I really want to do.
He didn't show any artistic interest at all because he never had a chance to do anything artistic.
Then my father had the idea to send him to a good friend of him, and he lived in Eindhoven.
Go van Antwerpen was his name.
My father used to always tell us an apprentice is only as good as they appear to be. The key is finding someone that will actually mentor you and actually teach you something.
When I could see that I could do creative stuff, and I didn't know at that time that I had that in me to be seeing things in a different way.
He apprenticed and actually started working on ladies versus men.
Sometimes you don't know yourself what's hidden in you until somebody brings it out.
In the hairdressing community, there's a lot more involved to just cutting hair. There's designing hair, there's coloring hair, there's perming hair, which typically barbers didn't do.
Go van Antwerpen was president of the Hairdressers Federation. He was organized in groups and we would go to different towns in competitions in hairdressing. He wanted me to compete right away, but I didn't know anything about competition.
What's hair competition all about? It's a competition, you think of sports. But this really was to expand your horizon, if you will, to stretch out and let your imagination go to work, to create a hairstyle that was better than the next hairdresser, that was better executed.
It has to be such meticulous work. Every square inch on your head is part of the design.
You competed against 100, 150 different hairdressers.
The judges, they usually have been successful hairstylists who thought along the same lines, who appreciated detailed work.
Competition was a very important element of my career and my life, and my boss, he took me to these competitions and I had to learn it by myself because I didn't have a trainer. So my eyes were the trainer, and then my ability to work at it is what made me then see. The first competition I did, I didn't even come close. The fifth one, I think I was about halfway there. It took 8 competitions before I finally got an award in competition.
When he got into the beauty field, he didn't have a talent. He developed the talent.
If you have a strong desire and you see what others can do that you could do too, but boy, you have to work at it. That made the strongest impact why I fell in love in being a creative hair designer.
He always was an extreme shy person. When he was working in the salon, he always made a joke. He always said, I had the most beautiful backs on the client's head because I would always hide behind the client's head and I would work on the back so that they couldn't see my face. He didn't have confidence until he started competition styling, and he became so good at it.
Later on from Holland, I was able to start traveling to Germany, to Austria, to France, to Switzerland. You know, I was starting to get into international competitions and world championships competitions. I saw fabulous work and I really got good at it.
He won every award imaginable. He had a feel for what they needed and for what looked good.
After the war, they needed beauty in Europe. The desire to see more joy and prettiness, which there was not much prettiness because it was poor. There was basically no fashion because there was no money.
The harder times became, the woman definitely wanted that moral uplift of a hairdo. It's not that they would not go to the hairdresser anymore. As a matter of fact, I think They went in spite of things.
People would come to the salon and bring a towel and bring a piece of wood so that it could be heated. It was obvious that the desire for beauty was always there.
When Leo walked into my life, he had made a wonderful name for himself through competitions.
My mother was the oldest of 3 girls. I think my mother always had a strong sense about fashion and beauty, and those things were always really important to her. She got her first job, the receptionist for the salon.
It was a 5-star salon, was the top salon in the whole area.
About 3 months before he came, the buzz was going around that Meneer de Bock had hired a hairstylist by the name of Leo Passage. As time went on, people kept talking and talking about it, and I couldn't wait to meet Leo Passage, the big Leo Passage. And I'll never forget, he walks in, and I take one look at him, and then my eyes went to his hands, and I thought they were the most beautiful hands I've ever seen. They were hands with long fingers.
She was like a receptionist, a salesperson. She was very young, 14. But she looked fabulous for 14.
When he started doing clients, he did hair like you wouldn't believe. It was absolutely fantastic. He made little old ladies look 15 years younger. He made young girls, if they wanted to, a little older. He just had a way of making people feel good about themselves. Leo had a very kind and sweet personality. He got along with people, and he had a way of styling hair that before you knew it, everybody wanted to be styled by Leo.
She loved working in the salon. Then when she met my father, it was an opportunity for her to explore even further those things that she loved, fashion and hair and makeup. It started their love affair.
Because of my competition and winnings, I could do the better clients that came in there, and my boss was really pushing me hard in that salon. He wanted me to compete right away.
Leo was here for about, in the salon, about 6 months. He had a steady model that he used for competitions. She couldn't make it.
This is where Leni came in.
I have got to tell you, I mean, my head just swelled. I couldn't believe it that Leo Passage asked me to model for him.
She had pitch black hair. Nice hair. But at that time, when we were doing competition, we bleached hair to a pale peach color.
Sugar spun hair. It had to be very light, because that's how you could see a beautiful style. You did not see details on dark hair. It was fine with me to do this, but there was no way I thought my mother, for sure, was going to agree to this.
She said, "What do you mean, how beautiful black hair? You're gonna bleach it out?" She says, "I promise you, when I come back after the competition, she gets pitch black hair again. No problem."
We had about a week, I think, to get my hair lightened. Every day, we bleached, and we bleached, and we bleached, and it just didn't want to lighten up enough because of the dark hair, all this pigment in the hair. I remember going home that night, and my mother, I think, she just couldn't believe it. So we went to Utrecht the next day, and we went to that competition, and there were several hundred people in the competition, and I know we placed 6th place, which was fantastic. It was very good.
And then finally, I had to dye her hair back to black, but it came out a little greenish. And my mother-in-law was absolutely just very upset. It was such a drama. We didn't talk for 6 weeks, because now she was so proud of her hair, and now she didn't have hair. It was all breaking off.
Really, before you knew it, my hair was back to manageable and was back to good. And hair, thank God, grows. So no big harm was done. And from there, anything Leo wanted to do, you want to burn my hair, you want to numb my hair, go for it. Do it, you know, as long as you do a good job, perfect.
We made up. Now later on, she became my model in many competitions. We went to Vienna, we went to Germany, we went everywhere. The Belgium in competition, the Holland in competitions.
I personally never traveled before, but when I met Leo, Leo always had this restlessness. I learned to love traveling through him as well. We did many competitions. Just about every weekend we would be going somewhere, and of course, not having a car, we went either by bus or we went by train. This one competition I remember was in Germany. We took one bike, he rode the bike, and I was sitting on the back seat with my little suitcase, and of course at the time the dresses were big and fluffy with the big petticoats, and so I remember being on that bicycle with my big petticoat on my lap and my little suitcase all packed, and we made it.
She and my father were just a great love story, an amazing match between the two of them. She complimented him and he complimented her.
There's sort of the yin and the yang, which works really well for them, although it sometimes leaves a little wreckage.
Our next big competition, which was an international competition, was called the Golden Tulip.
We went and she would help me, so she would do the front while I was doing the rest of them, and she was critiquing me.
I remember that we were both on edge, getting him more and more nervous, and he said, be quiet, and I was very, very nervous myself.
I had my tempo, there she had her tempo.
Then the hairdresser has to leave, the model stays on the platform for the judges to come and judge that before the next style gets redone again. And again, the judges had done their work, and then the hairdresser is supposed to come back again.
I didn't show up.
And I'm thinking, he wouldn't do that. He couldn't do that to me. And I'm waiting, and I'm waiting. All the other hairdressers started. I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, now what am I gonna do? And the moment I got up, I got an applause from the audience. They all knew what had gone on. I could have killed them. The beauty of competition is only what you see when you're sitting on the stage and when the hairdresser does your hair, and it's all very beautiful and it's perfect. I remember that hours and hours we practiced, and it was always in my parents' kitchen. Of course, you can imagine what happened to my mother's kitchen with all the colors and the hair. She had hair everywhere at that time. It was all the Angora hair that they used for hair pieces. She had Angora hair everywhere. And she said to Leo, one of these days I cannot take this anymore. You're gonna have to go somewhere else. Oh, come on, Mom. And he would call my mom, Mom. Mom, I love you. Let me do the hairstyling. It's important for our future. And then she said, melted, and she said, okay, go ahead.
Well, I think during those years that he was on the competition circuit, it sort of was his exploratory years. So he spent that time sort of stretching the boundaries of what was possible. But what he knew at the end of the day was that in order to continue to be successful, it wasn't about the ego, it wasn't about who Leo Passage was. He knew back then that it has to start with the foundation of, I think, a very grounded relationship. He really found that with my mother. He and my mother had a deep, deep trust between each other. With that, they knew that anything was possible.
So as time went on and Leo and I became more serious, we talked marriage. Leo's father decided that it would be a good thing for us to move to Belgium so that Leo could work full-time in his father's salon. I think Leo started realizing that if he were to do that, that would really be the end of his traveling. What happened was, in the German trade magazines, Leo saw that people from the United States wanted to have European hairdressers, because they were supposedly very professional in their job. Leo decided Chicago.
It was good that we came to Chicago because we're in the middle of the country. Midwest being very immigrant-friendly.
He rode away to Pierre-André. His future boss sent back, within 3 months, I want you to be here. He wasn't going to leave me behind, so we would have to be married so I could be on his visa. The big question became, what are we going to do with our parents? We told them, we have changed our minds. We are going to immigrate to America. At that point, Leo's father absolutely lost it.
My father wanted me to come back to the hometown to take over the business.
And then my father kind of got into it and he said, listen, if that's what the kids want to do, I think I support them because that's their future, it's their life.
For them, America was, we'll never see him again.
To go to America at that time in the 50s meant you didn't just get on an airplane. You had to take a boat, you left, and you most probably never came back. Being young and in love, to us it didn't matter. As long as we were together and we could go to the States, we didn't really consider what we did to our parents. It was probably very, very selfish. Leo's father, I think he then knew that Leo couldn't live in a small town, that he needed to be in a bigger city. Leo still had this restlessness. He cannot sit still in one place. He needs to go. He needs to see people. He needs to go places. He needs to see new things.
We took the boat from Rotterdam in November 1958, and it was going to be a 7-day trip to get to New York City.
But the storms were so awful, it lasted 9 days. Leo was one of 5 people that did not get seasick. Even the help was seasick. I mean, I was seasick, we hadn't even left the harbor of Rotterdam, I was seasick.
My father came to this country with $75 in his pocket.
From New York with TWA, we arrived finally in this snowy city. And here, my boss, Pierre-André, and his wife, in boots, heavy clothes on it. And, you know, like, did I land in the North Pole here? You know.
Pierre-André Gourgachon was the name of the employer. He was a shrewd businessman. He recognized that the European hairdressers at that time were far superior to the American.
We had that certain ambience.
He felt if you had an accent and you came from Europe, the ladies will like it, you know, and that would be a good business by itself. And he was right about that.
I met Leo in '58. We used to work for the same company, except he worked in Evanston, I was in Highland Park, and we actually met as the employer had a Christmas party. And I was the only one who had a car, and he was asking me if I could drive Leo and Leni to the Christmas party, and that's how the whole romance started.
We just became friends because we were young immigrants and we spoke sort of the same language and we liked each other. We danced, we would go to all the little nightclubs and hang out every Saturday night. When you look at the statistics of people who left Northern Europe and Europe between 1950 and 1960, it's all that same type of a person, basically. That strive of being someplace where it's different, not fearful.
My whole generation at that time rejected what happened during Hitler, and the lost war, so to speak, put a great pall on our ideology or enthusiasm about Germany.
Us kids who all went through 3 years of apprenticeship and hardcore base training as young 13 and 14-year-old kids, we had a lot of drive.
We were too far down, and the uplift was just not fast enough. And here's America. All that promise, you can make it in America and all that. So it was our dream, and we pursued that one. For us, it was relatively easy to establish ourselves here. We were superstars coming from Europe, because we had a much better education than what the American schools were offering.
I personally felt that I was pretty average hairdresser. Good hairdresser, but an average hairdresser. Good training, good basics, kindness, politeness, skills, good enough to make everybody happy.
You must understand that when Leo came over here, he was already a champion in his own right in Europe. He was way ahead of everybody.
I must say my boss was smart enough to advertise me really the European champion. He had 95 awards, and so I got quickly clients coming. And I started to work as soon I could get into that salon all 6 days.
He had absolutely no hang-ups. He was never negative. He didn't come across like he was any more genius than we were. He didn't. He was very modest.
Within 6 months to the first year, I was able to do 40 clients a day. I just had them lined up, and sometimes they were for four weeks waiting on appointments to get in. I have all these clients. For 2 years I built up, I had 2 assistants, and the army calls me in, because one of the things when you came to America, you get a green card. When Uncle Sam calls you, you go in. I was to go in a boot camp in Georgia on Monday.
I went to the doctor for a physical, and I found out that I was expecting. So I said to my doctor in my broken English, what am I going to do? And he says, go to the draft and maybe he will get out of it.
This is Thursday, Friday. I was on my last customers doing, he says, you know, I'll see you when I come back and thank you and all that. But I was really down. My wife walks in the salon on this busy day.
And I said, Leo, let me talk to you. He said, I'm busy.
Just please leave me alone. You know, we talk later. Can't wait.
He said, no, I think you want to hear that. What is it? I said, maybe you don't have to go in the army.
What do you mean you don't have to go on Monday? It's postponed. What does that mean, postponed? Postponed means you don't have to go Monday. Why? I'm pregnant. Ooh, that changed the story. You know, so here, all of this at the last minute, she's pregnant.
Our son Robert kept him out of the army.
I had the feeling at that time, of course, neither one of us knew what's going to happen in the future, but he always had that dream of progressing.
I wanted to compete immediately because that helped me in Europe. We took the Greyhound bus from Chicago to Detroit. It was a 2-day competition, so like 200 competitors, but only 25 would do the second day.
They didn't know what to do with this work because it was so excellent. They couldn't give him the first prize because it was not in a, quote, trend. And trend at that time meant one particular hairstyle had to be followed through. And he did something fabulous and wonderful, and they couldn't do anything with him.
We won, I think, 3rd place or something like that.
He caught on very quickly, and then he adjusted to the trend, and then it was up and running. Back in Germany, I went to those international competitions to watch. I said, I wish I could do that, but where do you learn that? You know, nobody was really teaching that. Leo said, I need somebody to drive me. You want to drive me, and I teach you how to do competition work.
I think there was a lot of camaraderie in the competition world. There were a lot of other immigrants that he met early on in his career that came from similar backgrounds. He actually created a club where these competitors would travel together from competition to competition, share ideas, and help each other to become better.
We had a weekly meeting whereby we had live models.
When we would do a model, then we would take a picture, a slide of it. We would project it against a white wall, and then I would draw for them what is form. And I would take that silhouette from front, back, top, and side, and shut the light off, so you only could see an outline, just like a sketch. What is the form? And then we would put the light back in, and whatever they had designed inside, or I designed inside, movements of texture, of color, then I would go into details and draw the next component part within that form.
Leo was basically training a little group of us, and thank God he did that, because I learned a lot about advanced hairstyling. His vision of the profession was way above what I was used to. He awakened in us the competitive spirit. We entered competition, and we did very well. As a group from Chicago, we sort of called ourselves facetiously the Club Artistic of Chicago. Whenever we went into a competition, Leo always had the first prize, and the rest of us either had second or third, who also ran, but always on the top.
My father was very talented, and he rose to the top very quickly. Because of that success, people gravitated to him because they wanted to learn from someone that had been so successful himself.
My partner, who was also in a Pierre Andre salon, Franz Wagner was his name, he and I started a salon in Glencoe. Immediately as we started our salon there, all these competitors that wanted to have training were coming to us on Sunday to our salon. So during the week, we were building up this clientele. We were always booked. It was a booming salon. At the same time, on weekends, here we're teaching.
He knew what he was talking about. He wasn't giving you a song and dance. You know, if he said this is not right, it wasn't right. But he didn't just criticize, he showed you how we could improve, what else could be done. Where is the vision in a hairstyle? First time this idea of designing came into being. We were following a new course in education.
He wanted to teach people to sort of spread that knowledge and that passion and joy for the industry. He wanted to have that go further than just what he could produce with his own hands. What he wanted to teach was how to create predictable hair designs. There was a time when he was doing a competition and my mother was the model. He had spent many, many, many hours preparing a hairpiece. The hairpiece in this particular category was extremely important, and it was the one thing that could be done ahead of time. He had put it in a box, and my mother had it on her lap.
I'm sitting there, and he is taking the piece out of this box. And at one point, I heard,
He went in to take the hairpiece out of the box and was then going to place it strategically on her head.
And he said, I just dropped my hairpiece. I said, pick it up, and don't pretend it didn't happen. Don't even think about it. I mean, my heart went into my throat. I couldn't imagine the work that had gotten into it, and I couldn't see the hairpiece, so I didn't know how damaged it was.
Because of his skill, he was able to then take that hairpiece, put it on her head, and create something different.
I remember people clapping when he was done. They just clapped because to have this happen, they were all hairstylists that were in competition, so they all knew the work that had gotten into this. And then to have something like that happen and to make the best out of it and make it probably even prettier than it was before, definitely deserved a round of applause.
And I think that's really what my father could do. He could produce what he intended, but he also had the creative ability to adapt if necessary. I think at the end of the day, he still was thinking in the back of his mind, well then how can I make that teachable to others or to myself? How can I take that information and be able to do it again? So it's not just a fluke that I did it this time. He wanted to better articulate what he was experiencing and imagining, especially because English wasn't his first language.
He didn't have a background in teaching. He realized that there must be a better way or an easier way, so he spent time at the Art Institute here in Chicago, learning about different art forms.
Leo said to Erwin, I'm going to go to the Art Institute, because he always had this vision with forms and the shapes.
We need to know more about design and more about art.
The two of them would then go once or twice a week to Chicago and take classes.
I got really involved in the Bauhaus. Who influenced me mostly it was Paul Klee, who very much knew how to break down design, applied design into mathematical ways of measuring things so that you could analyze a particular design, no matter what it was. And while Johannes Itten, he was more like a Zen Buddhism, he would be able to give you your internal part, because he would involve you to neutralize yourself, so pull all your thoughts away and then bring it back. I want you to draw a lion, he would say, you know, but before you're gonna draw a lion, I want you to be a lion. And he would have his students just express themselves as lions, different roaring, different things like that. And he got the emotion back going, and then he says, now put it on paper. So each one had a different expression. And this is what design is all about. It's not being a robot of copying things and so. So it influenced me a lot of the whys and how that you achieve a sensitivity to design and then learn about design. We have to sensitize these young people about applied arts and how it relates not just to hair, but everything around them. You go in metropolitan cities, you see around that. But even more basic is nature. You can look at nature and see what nature expresses. It can be how a branch of a tree, how it grows, or a leaf, or you see how the water runs, or how stones or weather has changed, or sand of a desert. All of these are expressions and has design elements that particularly the Bauhaus was constantly relating to. And that's what we try to do in bringing young future designers into the world of design and make them creative, not robots.
Bauhaus was actually applied to many different crafts in Europe, and there was a language already there that he could apply to the craft of hairdressing.
The Bauhaus made the most logical sense for me. I used the designer terminology. I used an analysis that was proven already by these gurus. And to me, it made all logical sense. It just put everything back together. And I was able to share that with my peers. And in competition where we challenged it even more, it became very exciting.
Leo's feelings that if education is done well, anyone can understand whatever of the 5 senses that they use in order to get the education.
By 1962, we opened our first school in Chicago, on the border of Chicago and Evans on Howard Street and Clark, 5 students. At the same time, we were importing wigs. Being from Europe, I knew the quality of wigs, and in hair pieces of competition, I knew the real fine materials.
When Pivot Point started growing, he didn't have that opportunity anymore to teach except for weekend competition teaching.
Still had the salon, having this, doing the imports, doing the extra training, doing the shows, platform work and all that. At the time I was working like crazy. It became too much.
He was constantly under pressure. The pressure was so hard that at one point we were afraid he was going to have a nervous breakdown because of the hours he put in.
It was just too much. I had not enough time with my family. Had been from my wife, would not have succeeded. She balanced it out. And then later on I was able to pull it back together, you know.
He was an artist, and for him to all of a sudden be a businessman was very difficult for him. He just didn't care for that.
I think that he got much more pleasure in helping a fellow hairdresser, becoming someone and succeeding.
That was a transition in his life. He made the decision that standing behind the chair wasn't something that he wanted to do any longer, but rather he wanted to teach.
He had too much knowledge to leave it behind the chair.
Leo was very much from the generation that you could make and shape the world, driven by how he grew up after the war, when so much of institutions weren't in place anymore. I think he's always had this attitude that you can in fact make and shape not only your own future, but you can also make and shape institutions, and you are really convinced of it. You can go into a country and you can create something from scratch.
Leo insisted that we use language that was universal. In the early days, we had lots of incredible people who were working for the company, and when you learn something that works, it becomes your own vocabulary.
We got more school people coming to us. They said, you need a book. So I said, okay, we do a book. and we call it Entree to Hair Design. We need also some visuals, film strips, overheads. We need also some lesson plans. We need a curriculum, but also we need to have our staff trained. So within 62 to 65, we started to actually become this educational publishing group. And when we started the school, it was called Frans and Leo. And then when Frans left me, he wanted to go into a different direction. And then we became Pivot Point.
Leo was really instrumental in the whole philosophy that a hair designer is a designer, not just to elevate the profession, but to really make the student think. Put the end in mind before you begin, just like an architect does a blueprint.
Everything starts from a point. Multiple points make a line. A line that you connect to another line makes a shape. A shape becomes two-dimensional. A shape becomes three-dimensional. What are the characteristics of the key forms of a circle, of a square, of a triangle? How do these two-dimensional, three-dimensional form relate to form in general? How do they relate to shapes of movements of a triangle, circle, or combinations of those? How do they then later on relate to color? So the whole concept was to take that systematic approach of thinking and be able to explain, to break it back down into whys. And in the beginning we called it point of origin. Then we called it the pivot point system.
I had heard Leo speak at different shows, and you knew that he was different. You knew that he had a gift.
I met Leo in 1966 in a hairdressing show in Rochester, New York. I went up to speak to him after his 2.5-hour class, and he invited me to have lunch. I learned more in 2.5 hours about what I was doing than I had in the whole 8 years that I was in the salon.
When I decided to approach Leo and say, Leo, I'm a good hairdresser. I love what I do, but I idolize you. I love what you do. I love what I saw you do on stage. How can I learn some of that?
I realized that everything that I did was guesswork. And that was the thing that really impressed me, to the point where I had to go to Chicago for further training.
I get the impression from Leo that what's mine is ours, and it's mine to share. And it will make you a better person, Mario. It will make you a better hairdresser, Mario. And maybe, Mario, someday you can share that with somebody else.
I was a hairdresser who used to make things by common sense, not because I knew what the results were going to be.
As a young hairdresser, I had a vision of what I wanted to have something look like. Did not have a system.
I saw Mr. Passage competing in New York. You know, oh my God, I wish I can do that. When he finished and he talked to us about, oh, pretty soon I'm gonna have this program. Maybe Puerto Rico can have that.
He said, I have a place in Howard Street. It's called Pivot Point. Come and see me. He says, you can come and practice here anytime you want. And I did. And then Leo asked me if I would do some classes, if I would be part of his team.
I said, oh my God, Leo, that'll be my dream. But I cannot express so well in English. And he looked at me and he said, that'll be no problem. You can do it. Remember that hairdressing is like love. You don't have to talk to be understood.
Leo was truly a visionary in the sense of creating the future for the industry. Creating that roadmap that you could get to the result that you were looking for.
It happens through having a team of devoted people who really knew it was the right thing, felt right about it, loved to do it, loved to educate people on the hows and whys of Pivot Point.
There really hasn't been anybody else, individual or group or company, that's been able to emulate that, because there's been so many people that have added input into creating and developing an absolutely foolproof system to teach people hairdressing.
That certainly was always an important thing to him, to be able to create educational materials that could be taught and understood by anyone.
Leo says, this is going to be the results, and there they were, right away.
He wanted an educational system that anybody could teach and learn, despite who was delivering the education.
That is truly a revolution, if you will, in the beauty industry. It did not exist before. Pivot Point navigated us to and through the hairstyle for a beautiful end result. That was truly the vision of Leo Passage.
During that period in the 60s and 70s, I brought all those famous gurus from our industry, from Europe particular, world championships, European championships, to this country.
He would work hard, but at the same time, you know, he had a family.
Growing up, we constantly had people staying at our house, coming to our house, people from all over the world. And you know, at the time, I didn't know that these were superstars in our industry and, you know, world-class competitors. It was just sort of part of our family life. I think probably that was a big part of the excitement for my mom, too, why she continued to, you know, work with my dad and model and all that was, you know, the people she was meeting and the places they were going. It was a really exciting time.
We were working hard, but I've got to run home and I've got to put the children to bed. Hairdressing was vitally important to him, but I think his family came first.
Ego was never any part of my father's being. He's just not that type of person. It was always about the education. It was always about the people that he was able to nurture. I equated to developing disciples who would go out and teach the Pivot Point word.
One of my first licensed member schools were in Puerto Rico in the 60s.
I started working with Pivot Point and learning all the techniques and all the program. I kept competing, but then I kept winning and winning and winning. It was so big for the Puerto Rican people, and I start training the competitors with the program, and they all start winning too. Leo said, okay, you haven't been in Europe competing? You want to go? I take care. But if you win, then you work with Pivot Point. I told my husband, and he said, you should do it. And I did, and I won in Belgium. And then from there on, I was only training, no more competition.
Emma started traveling with Pivot Point, first around the United States, then international, Japan and Europe. And one day she came home and said, you know, Leo told me if you want to be a distributor of Pivot Point, they're looking for distributor.
And then my husband started distributing Pivot Point all over the Caribbean, all Latin American, showing the people the program and the techniques.
Immediately after English, the first translation pretty much we did was Spanish. But Puerto Rico played a big role in the early stages to connect to the language. From there, Dominican Republic to Mexico to Argentina. They see us at a major event either in New York or in Mexico City or in San Juan, and people from South America would come. They say, okay, can we have this in Venezuela, in Caracas? Can we have that in Lima, in Ecuador? In Brazil, in Sao Paulo? Can we have in Santiago, in Chile? And so before you know, it evolved itself, and through that, a platform to really penetrate education deeper and deeper and deeper into the Hispanic market. I want to learn about the world. I want to see the world. That adventurousness in me, you know, created then also this curiosity, and education gave me the road to do that and find the right people. The most important thing is family. You don't realize it sometimes, particularly in a career, because you're so involved in that you suffer in a sense of not balancing out. We lived in an apartment for 9 years that we only paid $75, while my friends were having big homes because they were putting money in the homes while I was putting money in the business. My wife would say, when are we going to buy a house?
My family lived on the top floor of a duplex, a small little apartment, until I was 6 years old. And then we moved to a pretty modest 3-bedroom home a few miles away, and it's the same home my parents live in today.
If your family isn't right, it doesn't matter what you have.
Their passion was really about having the freedom to move around and to travel, and it wasn't important to have this big flashy house, and you know, it was more important to have the ability to get up and go whenever we wanted to. My parents believed the best education was had by living life and experiencing things in life, and doing that through travel was an important piece of it.
He would take a break from work for a week or two and take us on a vacation.
My father was on the road a lot, teaching and working, and the way we were able to stay in contact with my dad was to go on the road with him.
My father bought this rickety old Winnebago that my mother absolutely did not want to have.
Well, we were definitely the Beverly Hillbillies when it came to vacationing.
He thought that by putting her name on the top of the Winnebago, that she would be so thrilled to own this vehicle. I can't say she was thrilled.
Our family vacations consisted usually of jumping in the motorhome and traveling to different parts of the country. All of our vacations were tied in with some kind of work that he was doing along the way, very much like Sam Walton's vacations were, you know. I mean, the family went with, but it was business as usual.
What I experienced when I was with my father at shows and at different events in the industry was everybody knew him. He was really a celebrity. It was fun as a kid. We were treated kind of special because, you know, we were with my father. My mother's been a great caretaker for my father over the years. They both had their roles. She's the wife and the mother, the caretaker, the homemaker, and she loved that role.
She played an important role in raising both myself and my sister, you know, which gave my father the opportunity to focus on his business.
My father was the breadwinner, and he loved that role. There wasn't really any sort of conflict with that. They both appreciated the other for doing what they were doing.
She understood what it took to be successful. Not that my mother ever worked in the business per se, but she played an important role, obviously, for my father and his success.
They've had a lot of fun over the years, too. They've traveled together. I think they have the same sort of morals and philosophy about life. The deep, important things are similar, but sort of the peripheral things are very different, so they complement each other. A family business that started by a true entrepreneur like my father, the company really becomes that person's child. And in the case of a man, it's really the only child that he can give birth to. And I think in my father's case, that's really true. Pivot Point is his real true child in that sense. He gave birth to it. He nurtured it. It was having an opportunity to express his passion and just giving other people the opportunity to do the same.
I don't know if you know his schedule at times, because Leni would tell, he would fly in from Hong Kong, and Leni would meet him on the airport with fresh underwear, and he'll fly to Germany. Can you imagine that? To have that type of an energy? And sometimes he would come in and he would be beat, obviously beat. And you start talking about something of interest. And it's not just hair. You know, you could start a conversation about the Galapagos Islands, and he would literally perk up he got this adrenaline shot, and I never could figure that out, where he got that energy.
Through Hong Kong, we really then developed the rest. We did Indonesia, we did Singapore, we did Malaysia, we did even the Philippines at that time, and we started to develop that Southeast Asian, even Korea started to come into that particular time. We had to do it in their languages, but we adapted to that market. We were also the very first ones to be invited into China from our industry. That was in '79. President Carter at that time had made arrangements. So my international team from Europe, from Asia, from Australia, from the United States, we did what was called a technical tour in China. Now think about it, '79, this was right after the Cultural Revolution. Women and men, everyone had the same outfit. Women had just 2 braids, just like everyone alike, equalization. When we did with our flamboyant hair designers team, it was such a total different world. Actually, we found out that our audience that we were demonstrating had nothing to do with our profession. I mean, they sent in their government people or their army people, and they were all sitting there, and we wonder why we didn't get any reactions when we were doing all these exciting hairstyles and colors and things. We had to do these makeovers, you know. That was like a big shock value, you know, because even right after the show, these girls would take it quickly off because they would feel very uncomfortable to be in a society who had forbidden this. When we were in Shanghai, there was a government salon. They were doing perms, permanent waves. There were like 2 blocks of ladies in line waiting to get their perm done. So it shows that people want to beautify themselves or feel different. When we saw that, we could see, wow, the future of this in China, that's going to be something else. So we walk into town, and it was like hundreds of people behind us, just walking behind us, like we came from another planet. The way we were dressed, the way we were looked. And we did find, finally, some professional in one town in Hangzhou. I come in front of a salon. I said, look here, a hair salon. So we look into the window, and there is an older gentleman with a white coat from top to bottom, like a doctor, you know. When I started, remember, I said, my first apprentice, I had this white coat on and stiff collar. Here I see this elderly man teaching a group of other hairdressers in that salon. We introduced ourselves, and they were a little bit afraid or shocked. You know, they were not used to that. You know, in particular, the older gentleman, he felt like the master, and what are these people doing there? Quickly, as a professional, you look into each other's eye and we're the same. So he was cutting hair with a shear this big. So he's using shears like that. We were using shears this big. Whole different technique. In discussion came, after getting familiar, is this, would you want Mr. Passage to do a demonstration? So I take this little shear out and I started to do the techniques. The camaraderie between 2 different cultures and multiple cultures, and just having a common thing opened the language by itself. Everyone got so excited, and later on we invited him in Shanghai for our next show. But these were some of the experiences that it shows you that you can connect to people if you have something in common.
Before in China, hairdresser just cut the hair. After Leo Passage, after People Point come to China, we understand hairdresser need the education. Hairdresser is hairstyler. Hairstylist help you have better life.
Leo not only has this uncanny ability to attract people to him because of his engaging personality, but it also is because he has the brain and the educational knowledge base that he shares that is magnetic. You want to learn more. You want to see what he sees.
Once, years ago, he asked me, have you ever thought about becoming a missionary? And I was like, Ever thought about becoming a missionary? Me? No, not at all. Not at all. And then I looked at him and I thought, he's actually not asking me something, he wants to tell me something. And he proceeded and he said, yeah, that's what I wanted to do when I was very young. I wanted to be a missionary. I wanted to help people and I wanted to travel around the world. And that's what the image was that he had of a missionary. A drive to empower other people.
Pivot Point being globally, we sense the need of giving back and doing whatever we can. And we're fortunate to live in this country where we can do these things and offer so many opportunities. So in the City of Hope or any other charity that we are involved to. And it's about people. What does education do to them? How can you help them? And that's who we are. That's what we're all about.
It was always about giving back to people. I think that's probably why he spent so much time over the years in poor countries, many third world countries, where he wanted to share something that he loved with people that would give them the basic necessities to earn a living.
My father was diagnosed with a progressive lung disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. He was told he probably had between 2 and 5 years to live.
Leo, the type of person he is, who doesn't take no for an answer, said, "Doctor, I have contacts all over the world. Where can I go?" And the doctor said, if we don't have it, nobody has it.
My father just doesn't give up. He contacted a lot of people through his network of friends and business associates.
Dietmar Pleiner from Sweden knew a good friend of his who worked at the University of Vienna in Austria, and happened to know of a study that was going on pulmonary fibrosis.
I said, "Doctor, I want to grow old with this man." And he said, "Don't worry, you will."
Well, obviously, it was a very difficult time in our family. You never even think about something like that until it happens.
We went back for the first 2 years, every 3 months, to Vienna. The only ones that knew about it was our children.
It ended up being that a great result came from the test that he did. They now are able to treat it here in the United States, and he's actually in the medical books as a success story and part of this fabulous treatment that they discovered.
Where he gets his positive attitude from, I don't know, but he always comes across as a typical survivor and deals with new reality in an extremely positive way.
I had no idea that there was this huge corporation called Pivot Point. It was just where my mother had taken me to get my hair cut when I was a little girl, and I fell in love with the industry and decided that that's what I wanted to do.
I went to beauty school and I did very well in my basic training, and I graduated at the top of my class. However, I felt like I needed more.
I went to beauty school in Japan, and at the time I spoke hardly any Japanese. So it was always like kind of monkey see, monkey do. I had to copy what everyone was saying.
Before I went to Pivot Point, I actually went to barber school first. And, you know, barber school in the 70s was a pretty uninspiring place.
One of the educators that Leo had international traveling, her name was Emma Ayala. She came into our school, and when I saw this woman cut hair and design hair and move hair, I was so inspired.
I got to know a very good hairdresser. He said, "You have to go see Leo Passage. If you ever want to work for a company in our industry, that's the company you need to work for."
I said, "I want to go learn where you were taught." She said, "Well, you need to go to Pivot Point in Chicago, and you need to go see Mr. Leo Passage." I said, "I would love to."
I'll never forget the first day that I went to view the school. I'm from a very small town outside of Chicago, and I had never seen such colorful people in my entire life. Beautiful mix of European artists commingling with American artists was just awe-inspiring.
Even though I had gone to beauty school for a year, it gave me more of a perception of, you know, how to get volume, and it was the scientific approach to hair.
When you were taught a certain way to cut and design hair in the time of the 70s, and then you married the bridge between Pivot Point, it became so much more clear.
The language itself that directs you to create, it is very, very elegant.
Pivot Point has put a meaning behind the word, and if you open a dictionary and look at a meaning, that's what it relates to.
The language of Pivot Point is all around the world. Leo did stress not using trend terminology in language. Make sure that that word that we use, our word choice, can be translated by a dictionary so that it can be easily moved into a different language. Pivot Point's language is timeless.
It's very empowering to learn some tools. You can see that in young kids when they learn the letters of the alphabet and they can suddenly start spelling words. And it's not different. I think Leo has set out to create the alphabet of hairdressing, how it's done. You learn the letters, you learn the basics, and then simple words, more complex words, phrases, and in the end you write your own novel. And then you decide whether you write romantic novels or action thrillers, but it all starts with the same thing. So instead of teaching people haircuts, it would teach people just the elements that make up a haircut, or as you will, the letters that make up a word.
I think it's like taking the most complex and turning it into simplicity.
Basically, what they would be able to do was present a much more consistent approach, both internally in their delivery. It would link much stronger to the salon and the commercial world. And really, what we would end up with is a less confused individual, but one that was undoubtedly a really good hairdresser.
During our teacher symposiums, we used to gather people from all over the world, and we would teach Pivot Point concepts, and we would have students from our own school who were there assisting us. Now, we had teachers from all different backgrounds, and once our students saw that the teachers didn't know as much as they knew because they didn't have a strong Pivot Point background yet, it was very enlightening to them.
When those young designers learn the philosophy of Pivot Point, it's like a wildfire. It just keeps going, 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 and it's just emerging more and more and more.
I think people underestimate the learning tool that Pivot Point and Leo created.
The more you learn the Pivot Point system, the more satisfied you were.
His ability to share his knowledge is so genuine. He's so authentic. You can see in his eyes, he gets a lot of joy from people learning.
I always felt if I had something to say, I could come to him, or if I had to ask him something. If it was a hairdo or a fishing line, he would show me exactly how to tie that knot. And people show you one time and then they go fishing, but he was there and got it, do it. That's a teacher.
I remember when Leo said to me, "Frans, what is hairdressing? It's the same job as a doctor. Because you have to touch, you have to speak, you have to think, and you have to make people better."
Pivot Point today educates more than 100,000 people a year. The numbers of people that we've educated in the last 50 years, you literally can say that we've touched the lives of millions of people. Not just people that we've taught the craft of hairdressing to, but also the clients that come to the people who we've taught.
It's a language of expression that relates to design, it relates to people, and no matter what culture you are, it connects.
He wants all of us to share it, and he knows that the students that are in our schools today are the future of the hair design industry.
You have to trust Leo Passage. And if you trust Leo, then you're open-minded. You begin to learn sufficiently and enough that then you are going to be able to begin to share. That's what Leo Passage has created. Pivot Point that will be handed down from generation to generation to generations and generations to come.
As a family, we've known Mr. Passage, and of course his dream and my father's dream was for Corrine and Robert and I to work together as the second generation.
And as children of the founder, you know, we have a responsibility to sort of carry on his legacy and yet find a way to carve our own path. And that's really complicated, to sort of find that balance between preserving the good things and the important things and continuing to change and evolve.
My sister and I didn't have any choice as far as going to beauty school was concerned. It was a given. It was something that my parents felt was important. They always felt like if we got our hairdressing license, we'd always have a way to earn a living. As we've developed our family's employment policy for future generations, one of the prerequisites is that you have to go to beauty school.
The influence from my mother and my father is to drive him to work hard and enjoy your work. But the drive is to make people happy, to make people nicer, beautiful.
Leo Passage is contagious. What he shares with you, it wants to make you share it with someone else. Call it pivot point if you like, but it's Leo Passage. He's not going to teach us pivot point. He's going to share pivot point with us. And that's what I really love about the whole system. It's the core of the beauty industry. It's Leo's vision that became pivot point. And I think that we are all harvesting the fruit from that.
He was teaching without airs. I don't know if I could have behaved like this with his success.
Many hairdressers have incredible talent in their hands, probably as good as Leo in his hands, but they don't have the brain to put this together.
Any student that knocks on Leo's doors is for him an opportunity to see the magic happen all over again. And he spends time with the student. I think that's what he would prefer doing every single day.
I think he saw it as a vehicle to allow him to do the things that he loved to do. Travel, be creative, bring groups of people together from all over the world and share ideas. The two important pieces that my father wants to preserve in the company, because it's just sort of the root of who he is and where he came from. One is education. My father has a vision that Pivot Point could educate beyond the hairdressing world. The other passion that will always be with my father, he would love to find a way to see that it continues to be an important part of what we do is competition. I think because my father knows what it did for him and how it launched this passion in him, and it was the beginning of everything for him in this industry, he strongly believes that it's the vehicle that people in the future can use to do the same for them as it has done for him.
I know Leo was happiest when he could teach other people. He loved teaching people what he knew, and he felt by teaching other people, he learned from them as well.
How do you make people successful? And to make them successful, it's understanding that it's not only in the outside, but the inside. You have to feel good, look good, sound good, and do good.